Hey, what's up, guys? Tonight is probably the night many of you have been waiting for a while. We've got our first our first brush with React, so this will be fun. And I think you're going to be surprised just how much just how much stuff that we've already learned is really relevant in here. Like, don't think that once you get into frameworks and whatever, you just throw out all the vanilla JavaScript or whatever. With React especially, it's, you're writing a lot of vanilla JavaScript. You're just using a few more keywords, basically, and a little bit of a different kind of structure to your code. So yeah, it'll be fun, I think. So just to clarify what we're going to learn today, at the end of the module, you should be able to describe ReactJS and why it was created and what it's trying to do. Explain what components are and how they work with React. Explain what state is, and demonstrate how to make a stateful React component and change the state of a component with a click listener. Yeah, I got a new mic, so it's like a desk mic, and I haven't had one before, so I'm kind of like trying to figure out where it works best on my desk. So sorry if I sound a little weird. I'm still trying to figure out where it looks best. Brian, I don't think that I can handle. I don't think that I can handle that notion right now. All right. So yeah, yeah. So just excuse me while I figure out how the mic should be. Yeah, I'll play back this lecture and see what it sounds like and do a little bit of sound manipulation later and get it in the right spot. So cool. So yeah. Well, does anyone know off the top of their head where React came from? Like, who wrote React? Facebook. Yep, Facebook wrote React. So some of the, I've used Facebook as an example of something with a lot of components in it before, right? Everything in Facebook is a component. Every post is a component. Every person's profile is a component. Everything in any of those kind of social media websites now is just nested components, nested components, nested components. And all those components have different pieces of data associated with them. For example, if you go on your friend's profile, there's an API call happening that requests all of their information from a server. So it requests probably like your mutual friends or whatever. Like, it pops up how many mutual friends you have. It requests all their images and all their posts and all that stuff. Whenever you're scrolling down and you hit that breakpoint where it has to load for a second to get some more images or some more posts, every time that happens, it's a re-render because you've called for more posts. So basically, they've just got a whole lot of stuff going on in any given section of their site, really. There's probably multiple API calls going on whenever you scroll or click on anything on Facebook. So they were having a lot of issues with performance because, if you think about it, in vanilla JavaScript and in some of the older frameworks like jQuery and all that, the way that you change things on a page is basically you either have to just fully reload the page and reload it with different data on it, or you have to update the DOM manually. And updating the DOM manually when you have that amount of data going through is really, really poor for performance because it basically just re-renders the whole thing instead of just what you need. So it, you're basically just reloading the page constantly all the time. So, I'm sure that the performance on the original Facebook, like in the mid aughts, was probably really bad. Luckily, they came up with this concept of React. So React is a JavaScript library. It's not technically a framework, though. You'll probably hear people refer to it as one. It's a library. And the main goal of it is essentially to increase that performance when you have really data-heavy applications where you're viewing a lot of data. So what are, if you guys have read some of the training kit, what are some of the things that it does to try to speed that up? What's the main functional component of React? Yeah, it uses a virtual DOM. So the main thing you need to know about the virtual DOM and how it works in practice is whenever you load new data from your server, so whenever you do an API call, like a GET request with the dog images the other day, whenever you do another API call and get more data, the virtual DOM is updated by React. You're not, it doesn't update the actual DOM directly in that way. So the way that the virtual DOM works is that whenever the virtual DOM is updated, it essentially just tells the DOM the small pieces that need to be changed instead of reloading the whole thing, refreshing the whole thing. And so that's like really a really huge performance increase. You're basically just telling it kind of do what you need to do. Don't refresh everything every time you get something new. So that's kind of one of the big reasons why React is so popular, and a lot of other frameworks kind of like are building off that same concept now. I don't know anything about Meteor.js, but probably. Yeah. So yeah. Let me dig in here a little bit. But yeah, so basically the thing that it's managing with the data is called state. So we can think of state in terms of, probably like the easiest example is just like a light bulb or something. So a light bulb would just have two states, right? It's either on or off. A traffic light has three states for the red, yellow, and green. Really, state is basically just some data that can be shifted between multiple values. Handling state in React is really how we talk to the virtual DOM and how the virtual DOM talks to the actual DOM. So fun stuff. So let's look at our code a little bit. Does anyone have any questions just like about React, what it's for, kind of like background info about React before we get into coding? Jules says, there's always seeming to be a new thing. How long do you suppose React will be relevant? You're not wrong. Like, there's always some new framework that pops up. I think React will be relevant for a while, at least. Facebook is one of the biggest companies out there, and they have like a huge team of people that work on it all the time and contribute open source to it as well. So I don't really see it like dying immediately. It's been around for like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now. So that's like, it's not very long, right? But it's a decent amount of time for a framework to still be like growing in popularity. And an important thing to note too is that even when things get out of date, like jQuery, I don't think a ton of new applications are being built with jQuery anymore, but there's still a ton of jobs out there that hire for jQuery because they're supporting applications that were built 10 years ago or whatever. So, I think the main thing to kind of take into account when you're talking about front-end frameworks is it doesn't really matter so much which one you know, as long as you're good at the fundamentals of a front-end framework, you can generally kind of transfer that to another front-end framework without a ton of problems. Like at work, we use Angular. I had never touched Angular prior to starting work there, and I was contributing code in like a week. So once you get good with one, it's really not hard to pick up others. What's the point of having a virtual DOM? So the virtual DOM allows us to. It's basically the thing that allows us to have much better performance, because the virtual DOM tells the DOM specifically what needs to be updated instead of refreshing the whole thing every time. Is it worth learning jQuery if you know React? There's a ton of jobs still that hire for jQuery. If you work in government or like public sector stuff at all, probably most of those websites or most of their applications are using jQuery. So, I mean, it's not horrible to know jQuery. It's always good to have more tools in your toolkit. So, I mean, don't not learn jQuery if you want to. What's the difference between React and React Native? Is there a difference? So React Native is used to build native mobile applications. I have not personally used React Native myself, so I can't really go much further into detail about it, but there is a difference. From what I understand, like the syntax and everything is really similar, but they're used for different purposes. What's my opinion of React? So I like React a lot. I like React a lot more than Angular, if I'm being honest. I think React is really fun to code and makes a lot of sense. I like the large part that I like about React is how everything is kind of condensed in one area, so you're not losing track of stuff. You guys might have noticed this phenomenon when we were working with like a JavaScript file and like an HTML file and a CSS file. You can kind of like lose track of where stuff is. And that's much less of a concern when your project looks like this, right? Like we essentially have our HTML and our JavaScript next to each other, and they're just referencing classes of our CSS that are in a CSS file. So everything's really, everything's much closer together. So I'm a fan of React. Yeah, so what was the definition of state? State is just, state is how you create dynamic components. So basically something where data can be changed between different values, and it'll cause some change in meaning of what you're trying to display. Instagram uses React as well, right? Yep. What if a job wants you to have 10 years of experience in React? Then they're dumb because React isn't that old. When you see stuff like that, it's usually just non-technical recruiters who don't really know what they're talking about, and that just means they want a senior developer, but they don't know what they're talking about, so they say something silly like that. Will React be relevant if Facebook is dead? So React is open source. So, I mean, even if Facebook somehow dies in the next 5 years or whatever, I think it would still be relevant. Though I hear this a lot, like for a lot of people seem to think that Facebook is like gonna be dead in the next like 5 years. you guys realize there's like 2 billion Facebook accounts, right? Like, it's not going to be dying anytime soon. It might be less. It might be growing less, but it's definitely not going to be dead, unless politics happen, which I'm not going to talk about. Okay. All right, cool. So that seems like all of the background questions. Yeah, Ed brings up a good point. React has gotten far beyond the point where it's just what Facebook uses. You know, tons of different places are using React now. It's just a really good, library. Like, you can bend it in so many different ways because it's what we call an unopinionated library, which means that you can kind of like formulate how you want to use it to fit your own needs as like a tech department or whatever. You can basically do whatever you want with it. It's just so, like, there's not a ton to React. It's all just manipulation of basic vanilla JavaScript. Cool. So let's talk about this stuff now. Yeah, so as I said, state is basically just something that can change and give different meaning to a website. So, for example, a state on Facebook might be, am I friends with this person or not? If you're friends with that person, you have different levels of permissions that you can interact with them with. Like, you can't just chat random strangers. It goes to like that special inbox that nobody ever looks at. And stuff like that. So you basically have the ability to do different things when that state changes. You use state when you basically need to keep track of something. So just in case, let me see. Render. So just in case you guys don't know what rendering means, it's basically just how the browser interprets everything and visualizes it. So the browser re-renders whenever data changes. So state is basically just how you keep track of that. No worries, Simone. I know how that is. So yeah, so any questions about state yet? I know we haven't really done anything with it yet, but is anyone confused just about what an example of state would be in an application, or how it might change? Letting people type a little bit. How do you decide where your state should live? There's a lot of different opinions about that. So some solutions like Redux basically have a centralized hub where all that data lives, and you kind of send it out and receive it back there. Excuse me. We're teaching webhooks now, which is kind of a more decentralized way of handling state. So, basically, it depends on what you're doing, but you can do it in multiple ways. Cool. Looks like there's a follow-up question to that, so give it one sec. Can you have state in more than one component? Yeah, definitely, and you can send the same data to different components if you need to. So, for example, on Facebook, you have a post. So like you have like your newsfeed post or whatever, but then you also have your little profile like icon and all that on the side too. So that's the same information. If you're making a post, it says like it has your picture and like your name and all that stuff, but also has your picture and your name up in the corner. So that's using the same data in two different components, and that data can change. So if you log out and log into someone else's account, then obviously the state of that has changed. Ooh. Yeah, so Adam says React components have a built-in state object. The state object is where you store property values that belong to the component. When the state object changes, the component re-renders. So yeah, that's kind of like the webhooks way of doing it. Yeah, David says you use class name because class is a reserved word in JS, right? Yeah. So this is the equivalent of saying class in just HTML. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to get going a little bit into the code. Now. So the first thing that you'll probably notice is all these import statements. Imports. So this is, you're going to have a bunch of import statements in pretty much all your components when you're building React, because you have to import React and React DOM usually as well. And whatever other pieces of other libraries or whatever you might be using. You're also going to import your CSS style sheets. Yeah, let me make this. Ooh, I have to fork it. Cool. Oops, I'm sorry. Let me delete that one. Do not click on that one. That was the old link. There. Cool. So yeah, cool. So here we're importing React DOM. You can read up more about what these specific pieces do on your own, but you pretty much need both of them to make React work. And then we're also importing useState. So useState is a hook. It's something that we use to manipulate and handle state in React. They're pretty much like brand new within the past couple months. So this is like really super cutting edge. Previously, we taught Redux as our state management handler. I think we still teach Redux, but I think there's less emphasis on it. And it's later in the curriculum, so don't worry about it regardless. Yeah, we're gonna mainly be using ReactJS. Cool. So we've got our import statements. So that's just making sure we've got all the stuff that we need to get this guy working. And then you'll notice that this structure looks pretty familiar. So if we let's just like comment this out for now. And comment this out for now. And yeah, I'll leave that in there. Cool. So if we look at this now, it should look pretty familiar. We're just making a function, right? Just like we've made components with vanilla JavaScript, we've just got a function right here. And then we are grabbing a element off of the actual DOM with a query selector, get element by ID. So if I inspect, excuse me, if I inspect here, if I look in the body, we see our root ID. And you'll notice it's just an empty div right here. It's just like the other DOM manipulation stuff we've done. We're just going to be adding stuff into this spot, basically. So our entire React application is just going to live inside this div. it's going to be dynamically added to the DOM as we go. So right now there's nothing in there because this function is just returning null. But yeah, there's eventually going to be stuff inside this div. So that's cool. Yeah, that div is just basically a container. Yeah. If you guys have questions about like later in the curriculum, I would say like check out the training kit later on, or talk to your TL because I've got a lot of stuff to get through in these lectures. Cool. So so yeah, so far we've just got this empty function, and we've got a root element that we're grabbing off of the DOM from our index.html. So if I look in here, this is the only HTML document in here. We can see it's just got this div root right there. That's really all there is in there. And this HTML page will be generated for you by the React generator. So you don't really even touch this thing unless you're doing something probably like advanced or customized. So so we grab that root element, and then the React DOM.render here, all this is saying is basically take this app, which is this function that we made, and render it under root element. So that's what these two parameters here are. We're just saying take this thing and then render it under this thing. So any questions on that so far? I think that's pretty straightforward. Hopefully pretty familiar too, because like this is what we went over in the components section and all that. All I said was the React DOM.render right here. These two parameters, this first one is just what we are going to be rendering. And then the second one is where we're going to be rendering it. So we're rendering this app component underneath the root element that we grab from the HTML. So it's like what we want to append and where. Yeah, pretty much. You can think of it that way. And I'm sure under the hood, that's probably what render is at least partially doing. I'm sure it's probably appending stuff if you look in the React library. Cool. Okay. So let's look at this thing. I talked about this a little bit. This use state is the first React hook we're going to look at. Adam says, "What's the backslash in the app component?" It's just like an HTML like image tag or whatever. So like if we do like this, that's pretty much what it is. It's just a self-closing element because it's an app, because it's a component. So that's just the syntax that you use to reference components in React. But yeah, so this use set state here is essentially how we're going to keep track of the data that we're going to have inside of here. Excuse me. So yeah, right now all we've got is we're having a count and we have a set count handler, and our use state is just keeping track of the count. So nothing crazy going on there yet. And you'll notice too, when I comment out this return statement, there's an error here. Anything that's being rendered has to return something. So like the reason I returned null is because if I didn't, there would be that error. So just make sure that you're always returning something from your components. Excuse me. Cool. So we've got our counter here. When I comment this back in, let's just take a look at this for a second, because I'm sure it probably looks pretty familiar. This looks almost exactly like HTML, right? Let's actually call JSX. This is actually JavaScript going on right here. It's not HTML, it's JavaScript. And it's pretty sweet. Jose says, when do we do when we do const count set count, so right here, are we creating those two variables, or are those like parameters, or what? So this is something called array destructuring. So let me open this over here. So I'll link this for you guys, because it's kind of, it's not new anymore, I guess. It's like new-ish. It came with the S6. But basically with destructuring an array, it's something that you can do to basically keep track of pieces of an array. If we wanna like make variables out of pieces of an array. So we would probably be used to doing something like this right now. This would be like an older way, and that's fine. Like, you can still do it this way if you want to. Basic destructuring is basically like this. So it's kind of confusing to explain, but essentially you can take indexes of the array and kind of make them their own named variables. So like in this context, we're basically taking the first two things of introduction, the first two indexes of introduction, and making them their own variables here. So when we console log greeting, it maps to hello, because they're the first two things, and same with pronoun and I. So yeah, this is a cool concept. You can read more about it as you go. So there's a lot of like different things that you can do with this. So you can skip stuff. I know there were things where we wanted to like skip, like way back in like parametric mix-ins, people were asking like, how do you skip certain things? Well, you can't actually skip stuff when you're destructuring. And functions, all different kinds of stuff works with destructuring. So fun stuff. And it says, can or should we replace the HTML code and only build it using React? So you still need this HTML. This is just auto-generated HTML from when you create a React project. So don't do anything to this. But yeah, from pretty much now on, you'll be using this JSX syntax. And this is what it looks like. Like, this is not HTML, like I said. This is JSX. Cool. So let's dig into this thing a little bit now. So get rid of that. Let's look at the pieces here. So I said, can I zoom a little bit? Yeah. Let me. Is it not zooming? I'll do this. Is that good? Cool. My scrolling wasn't working, so that was annoying. Cool. So let's look a little bit at this syntax then. So as I said, class name is just how you say class in JSX when we're applying a CSS class. So if we look in our CSS sheet, we've got dot counter. So these just are our classes that we're applying here. We can use other tags. So we've got like h1 and p tags and all that stuff. So that works. We've got even a span in here. So all these different things from HTML still work. This is probably the first like really unfamiliar thing that we see in here. So what's going on with this is when you have a set of curly braces in here, you're basically saying, okay, I'm going to be interpolating some data here. You guys probably remember that word from a little bit ago in the JavaScript fundamentals part, where we started using this guy, the $sign curlies. That's basically the same thing, but the syntax here is just a set of curlies. So what this means is that we can display our data as it is updated. So eventually, when we're, oh, I guess this is already in. So when we click on here, we're not refreshing the whole page every time, right? We're just updating this one thing as we click on it. So cool. So that's interpolating our data. Let's see what else in here. So see, we've got event handlers too. So event handlers, hopefully, hopefully are still pretty familiar. Yeah, exactly, Matt. When you have curlies, some kind of JavaScript goes in there. You can do other stuff too. So like right now, we're just showing the count variable. So if I wanted to, I could do like math in here. So it shows 4. If I do math, I can just write a string in here. You know, it's whatever JavaScript. Yeah, it's the same as doing that in vanilla JavaScript. Cool. So I'm going to put count back in there. Yeah, so click handlers. In vanilla, it looks like on click lowercase. We use camel case in React. This is like a reserved phrase in React. So on click is just going to be a click event handler for React. So let's break down what's going on in this thing a little bit. We've got an anonymous function going into updating the set count, basically. So this is calling our set count function, which is just count plus 1. So when we click the add 1 button, we're just adding 1 to the current count. So we can see that in action. So there are probably some questions about that. So I'll let people type for a second because I see a few people already typing. When that onClick is rendered in the DOM, does the HTML see it as an onClick, or does React keep the function separate? I ask because I remember it being bad practice to have script tags in the HTML as well as inline JS. When that onClick is rendered in the DOM, does the HTML see it as onClick? Oh, you're saying like does it compile it down to an onClick? Like the lowercase onClick? Yeah. I believe that it would, because everything when you build, so like if I were to like download this application and actually like build it out fully and then deploy it to like the App Store or something, everything gets compiled down to just base JavaScript at the end of the day. So I'm sure at some point down the chain, this is just a regular onClick function. The buttons seem to be uppercasing everything. What's causing that? Probably the CSS. It's like button container. Button. Yeah, text transform uppercase in button. Why the anonymous function? I never understood those. So when you have the anonymous function inside of the click handler here, well, let's just see what happens when I take it out. Too many re-renders. React limits the number of renders to prevent an infinite loop. So if you don't have that anonymous function there, this basically fires every nanosecond until it crashes. So the anonymous function basically makes it so that you have to do something for it to trigger. Otherwise, it's just working the entire time. Yeah, it just keeps clicking itself basically if you don't have the anonymous function. Line 22 scares you. Sorry. So DOM won't do React, it'll just keep on click. As far as I understand it, yeah. Like eventually that should get compiled down to just a regular lowercase on click. I'm not sure exactly where that happens down the line, but somewhere in the build process, this will be an on click. Jose says, I think we never did on-click. We didn't really focus too much on event handlers. We did mostly event listeners with that like for each syntax stuff. So like this, you can basically do this same thing all lowercase in vanilla JavaScript. Yeah, event listeners and event handlers do pretty much the same thing, but with different syntax. Michelle says, does it rewrite the code? Sorry, just trying to understand why it does that. What do you mean by it? Like when you build or when it re-renders or? Does the DOM inspect or rewrite the code? It doesn't rewrite the code. The DOM doesn't do anything. The DOM just takes information that we are giving it through code and updates itself. What that means is whenever we click this button and we increase that count by 1, all we're doing is taking this count variable and increasing it by 1. And so the DOM just renders that update. It just basically takes that thing and updates it. So it's not changing anything else on the page. It's just taking that new information and applying it to what's rendered on the screen. Cool. Okay. Yeah, so this is one way to do event listeners. Another way you can do them is you can actually separate out the functions. So like if I wanted to, I could take add one and I could pretty much just take this functionality. Oops. And drop this guy in there. So I like to do it this route where I abstract out all my functions instead of having a bunch of inline code. Because I think it's much easier to read instead of like seeing this thing and trying to decipher what's going on down there. Because you can get like pretty long event handlers, right? So like, I'm just gonna separate these out real quick because I think this is more like what actual code would look like. multiply by 5. Cool. So let me update these guys. And this guy. Cool. So this should all these guys should work. Cool. And they're still working properly. So we split out those functions a little bit. Yeah, so your classmates are saying imperative programming versus declarative programming. So those are some good phrases. Imperative programming is basically where you, I just saw that GIF. Imperative programming is pretty much what you guys have mostly been writing so far. So like for loops, where you're essentially telling the computer directly what you want to happen. Like every time I loop through something, I want you to add 1. Declarative programming is more like telling the computer what you want it to do, just like generally. So like using our array methods like mapping, like filtering, like reducing, those are more declarative approaches because you're just saying, I want to filter this data somehow. So take these parameters and filter it. So at the end of the day, everything eventually gets compiled down to imperative code. But when we're actually working on it, a more declarative style is helpful for working in a team. So it's generally a good idea to have these things separated out and make sure that you're using your array methods just so that you're not confusing your teammates. Thank you, Kadesha. So what is use state on line 7? She asks. So use state is just essentially where we're holding our information. So so when we first start out here, we're basically just saying count is 0. The way that works is we're saying take this count variable that we're creating here, and that's going to be like the value to that is being referenced here. So count, it starts out as 0. And set count is how we're going to affect count. Where is, cool, okay. So the way that, yeah, so that's the way the syntax works is that this little mini array that we've got here with our destructuring is we have a count variable, which is basically this value inside of the use state. And then we've got our set count, which is how we update that state. So we're using this set count function here to update it in these helper functions. So does anyone have any questions on that? It's probably helpful if I like write stuff out for you guys. So this is array destructuring. Count is a variable being set and referenced in the use state. Set count is a helper function we're using to update count. I don't really understand why you can't use a regular variable. I'm sure you could, but this is generally the way that people write hooks. It's just kind of convention. So I'd try to get used to this if you can. You do array destructuring a lot, so it's kind of good to get used to seeing this. Robert says, also use state is built into JavaScript, and count and set count are pulled from the use state array or whatever. Use state is built into React. And then we're basically just, so if let me actually just pull up the documents. It's probably easier if I show you what a use state actually looks like in the MDN. I should have probably pulled this up before class started, but we're basically just feeding in parameters to this use state value. So if we look at this destructuring here, this is basically what we're doing. So we can declare it like this if we want to. Like you can declare those variables above if you want to. You're just using them as an array, and you're referencing them to these first two values here. It's just like a way to reference the data to each other. Yeah, Jose, use state 0 equals start at 0. For the hook example, are we assigning use state to the count, set count array, or vice versa? So we're basically just associating these two variables with use state. That's all we're doing. Like we're just saying, so count is a thing that we want to keep track of, and set count is how we're changing it. And then those basically plug into use state. What can be passed inside use state? Only numeric values? No, you can pass in whatever. So like, I can put a string in there if I want to. It just depends what you're doing. So like we have a counter, so it makes sense to have a number in there. Yeah, what we put in here is just whatever initial value we have. So if we're gonna change it, so like if I put like hello in here and I do this, it's just gonna add a string 1 to the end because we've given it a string value. So it just depends what type you put in here. Basically, it's gonna take its cue for what you want from what you put in there to start. Can you put JSX in the use state? Interesting question. I'm not sure. I don't know why you would. I guess let's. Evidently you can, because it's created a div here. But I don't know that you could change it. Like I'm not sure what you would do with this, you know, because it's not like you would like. I mean, I guess you could like swap it out for like an H1 or something. Like you could probably actually swap out like components if you wanted to. That would be interesting. Can you do math in it? Yeah. So there's some math. Several people are typing. Y'all are just full of questions today. Okay, cool. I'm gonna move on a little bit before I lose track of time. It is moving forward. Cool. So we've got that. We've got our. Hopefully we kind of understand what's going on here now. We're basically just giving these. We're basically just saying to use state, keep track of these things. So yeah, there's that stuff. Let's see. Has it go that orange color? Cool. So yeah, so we've got our onClicks, we've got our JSX here. I guess I'll talk a little bit more. Actually, let's take a break because I just realized that we've been in here for like an hour already. So I'll give 5 minutes and then we will continue. All right. See you guys in 5. Hey guys, welcome back. So I'm going to talk a little more about I'm going to talk a little more about the array destructuring because I think that's probably a little bit confusing. And I was like Googling the syntax I was Googling like what would be the like equivalent of the MDN for React, trying to like just find like underneath the hood what this looked like to show you guys. And then I realized that like I'm literally console logging it right here. So I'm just like the silliest guy ever. So the reason, hopefully seeing this here makes a little more sense. So if we look at it again, this line 10 here, we have, we're basically just creating 2 variables, count and set count, and assigning them to the first and second values in use state. And if we look at use state, that's exactly what it looks like, right? We have our first value as the 0 that we feed in right here. So the 0 is being correlated to count. And then set count is, we're just saying this is a function that we're going to use to update it. Yeah, the React docs are really good. I just, for some reason, couldn't find what I was looking for. So, yeah. But yeah, React generally has really good documentation. So yeah, does anyone have more questions about the array destructuring now that we see this console log here? Just one more time, we're basically just setting the count to 0. So we're creating this count variable and saying that it's equal to 0. And then we're feeding in, we're creating basically just an anonymous function here. Like it's not really anonymous because we have it named, but we're just creating like an empty function basically. And then we just feed some value into it to do what we want to do with count here. So, so this add one is basically just taking in that that set count and adding 1 to the value of count. Dump questions, but is the primary use of console log in JS to check your work and test? Yeah, pretty much. You shouldn't really have any console logs when you're done coding something. Like when you build, most build packages will like basically take all the console logs and remove them. And there's like tons of other logs too. Like if you guys end up really liking like backend and like DevOps type stuff, like half your job is literally just like creating really good logging systems and stuff to see where errors happen and why they happen. So logging is really important. So that variable and function can be named anything. Yeah, these are just arbitrary terms. So I could name it counter if I wanted to, and like all this stuff breaks because I have to re-reference everything, but I can do that real quick and it'll work again. So, yep. That console log is awesome. After set count, we could keep adding functions, count, set count. You mean in here? set count. I mean, yeah, I think that I like having it just in one, because like you can manipulate what you're doing with it, right? Like you should only, I guess this is my opinion. You only really want to have things, interacting as little as possible. So like as few pieces as you can have is better. Assuming that they make sense and are like easy to read and all that stuff. But like if you can keep yourself from creating like extra stuff that isn't super necessary, then I think that is a better approach. Well, if you add another one, you'd have to define it again and give it meaning, right? Yeah, you wouldn't just want to like add something and have it doing the same thing. But you can have like multiple use states for different things in one in one component. So like if we look in the docs here, I think there's one right in the beginning where we can have multiple guys. Excuse me. So yeah, so here's one right here where we've got multiple things that we're keeping track of. So like if I want to just grab these and throw these in real quick, we can have all these different things here. And if I console log out age, we get 42 because that's the default value that we've created here. So you can keep track of like any number of things within one component. So the advantage of hooks is not having to create classes as an alternative. Yeah, you can pretty much do hooks or classes. Like we teach hooks now, but classes are like a valid thing to do as well. Obviously, like if we're doing something specifically about hooks, please use hooks because we're trying to train you guys on a specific skill. But if you want to use class syntax in personal projects or whatever, go for it. It's just a different way of writing it. Cool. Okay, that looks like all the questions. So yeah, so we can have multiple states in here. So do we have kind of any more questions about anything what's going on in here? So if not, I'm gonna, oh, actually this is good too. This would be the equivalent with class syntax down here. If you guys want to check out this, I'll link it again so you can see if you didn't open it up before. But this, let me comment this stuff out. Yeah, so this is basically the equivalent here. We just don't have the styles on this one. So this is what the class syntax looks like if you're interested in that. Looks like it saves a lot of time, but is less specific. Well, with class syntax, you basically keep track of your state in your constructor, and you're generally going to have to use something like Redux or Movex or one of those other helper libraries to send state back and forth between components and all that. Hooks basically just allow you to use hooks to send data, whereas you like pretty much have to import a whole other library to really effectively do that if you're just using class syntax. It gets really confusing really fast if you're not using something like Redux. So let me get this guy back in here. Okay. I think if nobody has any more questions about the code, I think we're going to do a little quick code along. Cool. Thanks for that link. Let me just grab my code along here. So, what's going on here is we've got these 3 buttons with the different color hearts on them, and we've got this red, like the descriptor here, color red or whatever. Right now it's hard-coded in here. It just says red. So the functionality that we're going for at the end of this code along is that when you click on one of these hearts, it should update to say the color. So like if I click on the blue heart, this one should say blue. So all I want you guys to do for this first segment of the code along is I want you to I pretty much just want you to update so that I want you to basically just update this so that we can set up like the skeleton structure. So get our use state set up for the color, and just log it out and make sure that the console logs look right. And then we'll go from there. So I just want you to get kind of the skeleton going right now. So I'm going to link this. I'll give you guys like 3 minutes to do that. So again, just get the skeleton structure of our use state set up. Welcome back, guys. Hopefully you started getting your skeleton set up. So let's get that working. So I'm going to come up here to the top underneath the declare a new state variable. I'm going to do color set color. Oh, I have to import use state first. Import React and use state. Cool. So we've got a use state set up here, and then we can replace this hard-coded value here with color. So now we've got that set to a dynamic state element at least. So if I change this to green, it should say green. Cool. So we've set up our basic initial state state handler there. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to uncomment this because so put this. Oh yeah. So this is basically, I'm just going to set it, I'm going to just set color initially to a hex code. So it's just a hex code that I have. So you can grab this value if you want to have it like verbatim copied here. But you know, any hex code that matches works. So this is just whatever default color that we're going to say. I'll just put it in default in the beginning. Cool. So and then if we look at this if-else thing right here, we're basically just going to set the color to change whenever we change the state value there. I don't really think this is pink. I think it's more red, but we'll go with it, I guess. So what we're going to do now is create that color handle color. Color is one of those words whenever you look at it, it looks like you spelled it wrong. And I hate it. Cool. So all we're going to do here is set color and then feed in color. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to hook it up to our event handlers. So this is going to be part 2 of the code along. I want you guys to hook this up to the buttons and get the buttons feeding in the proper values. So if you refresh, or if you're following along, I'll link again in case you're not, but you should be able to grab this and start trying to hook up our event handlers. So I'll give you guys 5 minutes to start with our event handlers down on the buttons here. And then we'll take another look at it together. So 5 minutes. If you're lost, please say something, because like I can definitely slow down a little bit if we need to. We're basically just going through this step by step together. So if you guys need explanation further, let me know. It would be helpful if you tell me what you're lost on, and rather than just saying that you're lost, so I can talk about it more. Simone, what we're trying to achieve is when we click on one of these, it should change this like default. It should change it to whatever color heart we press on. So if I click here, it should say blue. So right now, what I want you to do is basically make these buttons, when you click on them, have an event handler that submits the color that this if statement is expecting so that the color changes. So basically, our event handler should feed back these values in this if statement. If we look at our handle set color here, we're feeding in a color value, and we're just setting color to whatever we feed in. So like this is basically the equivalent of here. So in the beginning, it's set to default. We're feeding in green or red or blue in here through our click handlers. Does that make more sense, or are you guys just more confused? Yeah, I just want you guys to create a click handler that uses this method. Okay, cool. Yeah, so just create click handlers that use this method to set those colors from the buttons here. So there should be like on click here. So basically like continue on with creating on clicks for those. So yeah, Ryan, almost like that. But yeah, basically just create those on clicks, and when you click on them, it should replace this with the color value there. And again, the color is going to be mapped to these things. So like when you click on the green heart, you want to update color to be this string, or else it won't work. And the same for this one, and the same for this one. So you want to use these three strings here. Cool. So I'll give you guys 5 minutes now. If you get, just focus on getting even just one done, because once you get one done, it's pretty much just like flying through the other ones, right? So 5 minutes, and I'll see you guys in 5. I'll put this timer. Put the timer here next to it so you guys can see this stuff if you want to. Cool. Welcome back, everyone. See, some of you guys were able to complete, and some of you weren't, and that's totally fine. We're going to do it together now, so we can make sure everyone gets what's going on. Warren asks, well, he says, I can make event listeners, but I'm not sure what to do with them. I still don't know how useState is related to this part. Is it just holding or tracking the changes for re-render? Yeah, that's pretty much what it's doing. So our useState is just holding whatever state it's in right now. So the default, right now we have it set to default. Whenever we use this handle set color, we're going to change this value in here. So useState will be holding some other value. Okay, so let's set up our event handlers. Where's our button? So on click fools. I'll do it this way with the anonymous function in there first. So we'll do handle set color, and what color is this one? Blue. So if I click this one, you got blue. Then really all I have to do is literally just copy paste this and change the value. So drop that on there, drop that on there. Green and pink. Sweet. It looks really easy when I do that, but you know, it takes some background like understanding to get to that point. So saving auto formatted it, and I don't like this as much how it looks now. Yeah, yeah, you tend to overcomplicate stuff in the beginning, and that's fine. Like you'll get more used to it later. So now what I'm going to do is just destructure that a little bit and pull out those functions. Set to blue. Actually, I guess I can't really do that, can I? Because I'm just feeding a string in there. So yeah, actually, I'm not really even going to be able to destructure that one any further because we're just feeding a string in right here. I mean, I can. So yeah, I'll just do set to green, set to pink, green, pink. Yeah, we have this function here that handles it. Cool. So I'm just going to swap these values out with those anonymous functions now. So it'll make this look much nicer. Set to blue. Set to green. And set to pink. Cool, still works. Okay, let's read the questions. Is it easier to create variables with the function? Which one is industry standard? Is it easier to create variables with the function? Do you mean right here with our useState? Yeah, I would say that this would be the standard syntax for that. This section? Oh, like this. It depends how your team handles that, really. This is how I would personally do it if I was like coding a real project. Some people prefer to have this stuff all just inline. It really depends what your team tells you. Because I wouldn't say there's like a standard way, but if you're really like deconstructing everything, this would be the way that you would want to do it. So what is the if-else statement doing, and why do we have the handle set color? So this this if statement is what's changing the color. Oh, I don't have the actual color style hooked up. The let me check. Oh, yeah. I forgot to add this on here. Now when we click there, it changes the styles. My bad. I left that part out, so my bad on that one. So all this is doing is saying inline set the color to whatever color is happening here. So whenever we use this handle set color, we're changing the value of that color. We're feeding in a new color. Like we're literally just giving it a string, right? So we're setting color to blue with set to blue. We're doing it to green and we're doing it to pink. So based on whatever the color is being set to, it changes the color of the text here. I tried. Oh, yeah. Yeah, sorry about that, Jules. Warren says, so is useState changing the value from default, or are we changing the values in color or set color? useState is basically just like, it's just kind of like the intermediary between the DOM and your JavaScript. Like it's just keeping track of everything so that that data is just held in one place instead of multiple places. It's something called a single source of truth. So in some state handling methodologies, you'll have the potential where your states will kind of get crossed, and you'll have like a state be set to one value somewhere and have it set to another value somewhere else. So that can cause like errors and other issues. But useState basically just makes sure that all that stuff is handled in one place. So there's only one possible value of a state at a time. So useState doesn't change anything. It just basically is holding it. Is the only way to have used set color to have created a function? Yeah. So we're basically just feeding in an empty function right here, and then we're just using it in various places. And all we're doing in it is having a string. So yeah, you'd have to create, this basically creates the function, and then you have to use it. Ryan says, I think mine is broken. It don't work. Yeah, you need to take the semicolon out. If you've got the semicolon in there, it'll probably. Oh, cool. Yeah. Thank you for the catch there, David. Could you scroll down a bit to where you are implementing the styles.color? Yeah. So that this set of if blocks here is being referenced here. So where is it? Move this. Let's move this down to here. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Here. Here. Okay. So we've got our styles object here, and it just has this one key of color. We're basically just updating that style whenever we change the whenever we trigger one of these on-click buttons. So So yeah, it's just updating this value right here, which updates the inline style right here. Set color is in our use state declaration. So for the if-else part, you're setting the color of the string, but you can make it whatever color with the if-else. Yeah. So like if I change this away from green, like if I made a typo in here, it won't change the color anymore of that one. It'll go back to the default. The default color is red. This hex code is just red. So it'll basically just hit that else block because we're feeding in a value that isn't in any of the if blocks. But we can change any color in here if we wanted to. So like if I like copied this button here and maybe like set to orange, and then I'll copy this guy, set to orange. If I click on this one right now, it's not going to change it to orange because I haven't created an else if statement for orange. But I can basically just add whatever colors I want into here. So like X color for orange. So I'll grab this hex value and drop it in here. And now this one should turn orange. So does that make sense? We're just we can add whatever color we want in there. It's just what we're passing in is going to dictate it. And these don't have to match up either. Like these don't mean anything to each other. So if I swap these values around, so if I put this one here, it wouldn't care. So like now blue is orange text and orange is blue text. So there's no correlation between the hex code there and the value we're feeding in. It's just that, you know, it makes logical sense to feed in the word orange if we want it to turn orange. Cool. Okay. I guess I'm confused why we have the handle set color function. Isn't that what the second variable set color is for? Just to be able to on-click. So this is basically the intermediary for these set functions. We're just calling that function inside of these functions. So you can think of these as just like containers for specific cases of using this. And set color is like the function inside of this one. So set color is just the function that we're passing in as the reference for it in the use state. Yeah, you've got to be really careful with your syntax because like extra parentheses or like extra like semicolons and stuff in here will just make your code not work. So the syntax is really important. So probably most of you guys that have one that's broken right now just have like an extra semicolon or an extra curly brace or something. I'm missing a part in the link from the setting the color Yeah, okay. So right here, that's where we're actually setting the styles. So we're just using this styles object here as like a holder for color value. Does that help? Yeah, style is just like a built-in DOM property, pretty much. This is like the virtual DOM version of style. Several people are typing, so I will give several people a moment. Yeah, Heather, I added this part in. Jules says, what is this process called? What is this process called? I use state variable. I'd say probably like the use state declaration for color. Yeah, this is like the hook, but I'd probably refer to it as like the declaration of this specific one that I'm trying to keep track of. Trevor says, so all variables that are written in the style are virtual DOM examples for variables. Referring to this. So the reason that we can reference it this way is because of the interpolation from JSX. So we're just interpolating this thing into here. So we're just saying, take this color value and assign it to the style of this span. Several people typing still. Cool. Okay. Glad that clicked, Trevor. You're doing fine, Jose. Yeah, without JSX, it'd be something like styles equals styles.color. Yeah. We're just interpolating that value to make it a little easier. Cool. So I know this is a lot, but really, I think that you guys just need a minute to kind of play around with it, because most of this stuff is just a slightly different application of something that you guys already know how to do. With the DOM manipulation stuff we've been doing for the past couple weeks. So I think once you get into your project, it'll start clicking a little more. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of how it works at first, right, Ryan? You can see it and kind of understand what's going on, but you couldn't necessarily implement it on your own. In like teaching, that's like a level of understanding. Like there's like a pyramid that we use for like levels of understanding, and that's like an intermediary level where you can see it and you kind of understand what's going on, but you don't really know how to do it on your own yet. So you're traversing that pyramid, and eventually you'll get to the top. Yeah, definitely. Like the really tricky thing about React isn't like necessarily, I don't think it's necessarily like the concepts. It's just there's so much like slightly different syntax than what we're used to from vanilla JavaScript now. So like you have to make sure stuff is capitalized correctly. You have to make sure your curly braces are in the right place. That stuff will really mess you up. Cool. So I'm going to link these two things again, and then I'm going to introduce the homework for y'all, and then I'll let you go. So here's the guided project, and here's the code along. Cool. All right, so let's open up our projects. All right, so tonight we're making a football scorecard. I like that they've specified American football. I guess we do have EU cohorts now, so I guess football's different from them. But yeah, so we're going to make a scorecard. So we're pretty much going to be keeping track of score in our state. So there will be 2 buttons, one for each team, or 2 buttons for each team. One will increment, and one will increment by 3, and one will increment by 7 for a field goal or a touchdown. CSS is done, so you don't have to worry about styling. And there will be some, I think there's inline instructions in this one. So you're also going to see kind of the structure of how a React project is set up. So a lot of this stuff, actually all of this stuff is auto-generated when you create a React project, which I don't think you guys are actually creating anything yet because you're downloading this already set up. But all this stuff gets auto-generated by a utility, so you don't have to worry about remembering how to set that up. But this is kind of the structure of how a basic React project looks like. So let's look inside app.js. So yeah, so there's some inline instructions in here. They're not super verbose, but they should be enough to get you going. And then we've got steps 1 and 2. So adding team scores to the component state. So we're probably going to have 2 different use state declarations, one for each team. We're going to render the scores to the DOM, which is basically just creating that JSX. So we're going to want to interpolate values in there instead of having the currently hard-coded number of points. And then we're going to add the click functionality to increment the scores. So this is really, really similar to what we did in today's guided project and in the code along. So hopefully you guys do really well on this one because, yeah, this is like a large part of what React is. Like complex React projects are really just like these types of components nested within each other a bunch and talking back and forth. So if you can get this basic step down of just getting the components going, that's like a good chunk of working with React. So you'll be in a good spot. I'm reading through the questions in chat, so let me read through here. Yeah, so Trog asked, which HTML file do we use for live server? You don't use one. If you type yarn start or npm run, whichever one you're using, it'll pop open a window for you. Yeah, make sure you're inside of the React directory and just run npm start or yarn start, whichever one you're using. So Michael's posted an error. Yeah, so if it says you failed to compile because identifier React has already been declared, it just means that you're importing it twice somehow. So just find where you've imported it the second time. And we see what it'll look like. I'm not sure. I'll have to, I don't have like the solution code downloaded on my computer yet. But you guys should get it passed out to you. And I wouldn't be concerned about how it looks. Like this is more of a project about the functionality. So don't be like if you forget to attach classes or something, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Like you can go back and add the classes back later. if it doesn't look like how you want it to look like. Yeah, and if you guys have problems with Yarn, reach out to your TLs. They're experts in Yarn at this point, so they should be able to help you with this stuff. Kadesha is going to yell at me for saying that she's an expert with Yarn. It's not that one is better than the other, really. Yarn was created for the specific purpose, for a specific purpose that no longer really exists. So they're really kind of just similar now. Yarn tends to be used more in the React community. NPM is more of a neutral package manager. You use it with anything. You can technically use Yarn with anything too, but I see it mostly used with React. Cool. So anyone have any last questions? I'll take that as we're good, and I will let you guys go. Again, if you're having problems, like if you're having like tech support issues, message your TLs and they'll probably be able to help you figure it out. And if they can't, I'll go in and help figure out whatever the issue is. So I will see you guys on Thursday. See ya.